October 13th, 1974, Madison Square Garden. 20,000 people are on their feet, screaming for Frank Sinatra. The spotlights cut through the cigarette haze like searchlights hunting for a fugitive. Howard Cosell has just finished introducing him as the man who knows what losing means. The orchestra is swelling. The crowd is roaring. And Frank Sinatra stands in the wings, 60 seconds from the biggest comeback in entertainment history. His hand is shaking. Not from nerves. Frank Sinatra hasn't been nervous since 1943. His hand is shaking because for the first time in his life, he doesn't want to walk onto that stage. He looks out at the sea of faces, the tuxedos and evening gowns, the celebrities packed into the front rows like sardines in a diamond-studded can. Walter Cronkite is out there, Robert Redford, Carol Channing. Everyone who matters in America is waiting to worship him. And all Frank Sinatra can think is, what the hell am I doing here? He takes one step forward, then he stops. He turns to his manager, Jerry Weintraub, and says something that nobody will ever fully understand. This is the last time, Jerry, one way or another, the last time. Then he walks into the light. What happened over the next 90 minutes would be broadcast to millions. But what happened inside Frank Sinatra's heart that night would remain a secret he carried to his grave. To understand what was breaking inside Frank Sinatra that night, you have to go back 3 years to June 13th, 1971, to a retirement concert at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in Los Angeles that was supposed to end everything. Frank was 55 years old. He had been performing for 36 years. He had survived the Bobby Soxer craze of the 40s. He had clawed his way back from career death in the 50s. He had conquered Hollywood, Vegas, and the world. He had helped elect a president and been abandoned by him. He had loved and lost Ava Gardner, a wound that never fully healed. And he was tired of the applause that felt like an obligation, tired of singing the same songs to the same faces, tired of being Frank Sinatra. That night in 1971, he closed with Angel Eyes. It was a deliberate choice. The song ends with the line, "Excuse me while I disappear." Frank sang it like a man walking into fog. When he finished, he didn't bow, he didn't wave. He simply turned and walked off stage. No encore, no farewell speech. He was done. For the next 2 years, Frank tried to become someone else. He played golf. He painted. He went to bed early and woke up without anywhere to be. His wife Barbara described it as peaceful. His friends described it as slow death. The truth was somewhere in between. Frank Sinatra without a stage was like a shark without water. He was built to move, to perform, to command. Stillness was suffocation. But there was something else, something Frank didn't talk about. During those quiet nights in Palm Springs, Frank sat alone with his demons. The loneliness that had followed him since Hoboken. The depression that came in waves so dark he once described himself as an 18-carat manic depressive. The knowledge that all the applause in the world couldn't fill the hole inside him. He had retired to escape the emptiness, but the emptiness had followed him home. By 1973, the pressure to return was unbearable. 30,000 letters, phone calls from promoters offering blank checks, friends begging him to come back. Jerry Weintraub, a young manager with hungry eyes and a mouth full of promises, painted visions of glory. "Frank, they need you out there. The world needs you." Frank listened. He nodded. He agreed to an album called Old Blue Eyes Is Back. He agreed to a television special. He agreed to a 10-city comeback tour culminating in Madison Square Garden. But something was different. The old Frank would have attacked these projects with fire and fury. This Frank approached them like a man fulfilling a contract. He recorded the album. He did the TV special with Gene Kelly. He smiled for the cameras. But the spark was manufactured. Bill Miller, his longtime pianist, noticed it first. Frank would hit his marks, sing the notes, tell the jokes. But when the lights went down, he'd just sit there, staring at nothing. I asked him once if he was okay. He said, "Bill, I'm fine. I'm always fine. That's the problem." The tour kicked off in April 1974. Philadelphia, Boston, Chicago, sold-out arenas everywhere. Standing ovations that lasted 10 minutes. Reviews calling it the greatest comeback in entertainment history. Frank smiled through all of it. But backstage, he was a different man. He snapped at musicians. He complained about sound systems. He criticized the lighting, the set lists, the hotels. Nothing was right. Nothing could be right. Because the thing that was wrong wasn't outside him. It was inside. In July, the tour hit Australia. Frank was exhausted, irritable, hunting for a fight. When journalists pursued him aggressively, he gave them one. He called them bums, parasites, fags, broads, and buck-and-a-half hookers. The unions shut down his concerts. His plane was grounded. He was essentially trapped in a foreign country because he couldn't control his rage. It was a disaster, but for Frank, it was something else. It was a warning. Madison Square Garden was supposed to be the triumph, the main event. They marketed it like a heavyweight championship fight because that's exactly what it was supposed to be. Frank Sinatra, knocking out retirement, knocking out doubt, proving to the world that the chairman of the board was still king. The production was massive. A boxing ring-style stage in the center of the arena, Woody Herman and the young thundering herd. Cameras for a live ABC broadcast. 20,000 screaming fans and millions more watching at home. The rehearsals were rocky. Frank's voice, unused for 2 years before the comeback, was still finding its strength. The higher notes came out gravelly, strained. During the dress rehearsal the night before, he stopped mid-song and turned to the band. "What the hell is wrong with the monitors? I can't hear myself." The monitors were fine, but Frank couldn't admit the truth. He couldn't hear himself because he no longer recognized the voice coming out of his mouth. The night of the broadcast, Frank arrived early. He sat in his dressing room for an hour, alone. No visitors, no phone calls. Just Frank and a glass of Jack Daniels that he barely touched. Weintraub knocked on the door at 8:30. "Frank, we're on in 30 minutes. You okay?" There was a long silence. "Jerry, you ever wonder if they're clapping for you or just clapping because they think they're supposed to?" Weintraub laughed nervously. "Frank, come on, they love you." "That's not what I asked." Another silence. "They're clapping for a ghost, Jerry. A memory. I'm up there singing songs I recorded 20 years ago to people who want me to be the guy I was 20 years ago. But I'm not that guy anymore. I don't know who I am anymore." Weintraub didn't know what to say. He'd managed a lot of performers, but he'd never heard one talk like this before a show. Not Frank Sinatra. Not the guy who ate pressure for breakfast. "Frank, it's one night, one show. You do this, and you've done it. The biggest comeback ever. You'll own them." Frank looked at him with eyes that had seen everything and no longer cared. "Maybe I don't want to own them anymore, Jerry. Maybe I'm tired of being owned. Minus his reason. Maybe I'm tired of being owned. Minus his reason. Maybe I'm tired of being owned. Maybe I'm tired of being owned." The overture begins. The crowd explodes. Howard Cosell's voice booms through the arena. "Ladies and gentlemen, Frank Sinatra." Frank walks out into the light. The roar is deafening. 20,000 people on their feet, applauding, screaming, crying. Frank stands at center stage, surrounded by the fake boxing ring, looking out at faces blurred by spotlights and cigarette smoke. He waits for the noise to die down. It doesn't. It goes on and on. A wall of sound that would crush a lesser man. But Frank doesn't smile. He doesn't wave. He just stands there, absorbing it, letting it wash over him like a wave he's too tired to fight. Finally, he raises his hand. The crowd goes quiet. 20,000 people holding their breath. Frank opens his mouth, and nothing comes out. For 2 seconds, 3, 4, he stands there in silence. The band is waiting. The cameras are rolling. Millions of people are watching, and Frank Sinatra can't sing. Bill Miller hits the opening chord of "The Lady is a Tramp" again. A gentle prompt, a lifeline. Frank closes his eyes. He takes a breath, and somewhere deep inside him, the performer takes over. The ghost rises. She gets too hungry for dinner at 8. The song comes out. Gravelly, tired, but still Frank. The crowd goes wild. The show continues. For the next 90 minutes, Frank Sinatra performs the greatest comeback concert of his career. I Get a Kick Out of You, Autumn in New York, Angel Eyes, My Way, My Way, My Way, Times 2-6, Flanksome Sex, Autumn in New York. But something is different. Between songs, Frank talks to the audience. He tells jokes. He thanks people. But there are moments when he stops mid-sentence and stares into the distance. Moments when his smile flickers like a bad bulb. The cameras catch it. The fans don't notice. But Bill Miller does. Jerry Weintraub does. Near the end of the show, Frank launches into The House I Live In. It's an old song, a patriotic song, one he's sung 1,000 times. But tonight, his voice breaks on the line about neighbors and friends. Not from technical failure, from something else. He recovers. He finishes strong. My Way brings the house down. Standing ovation. 10 minutes of applause that seems like it will never end. Frank takes his bow. He waves. He blows kisses. He does everything the moment demands. Then he walks off stage. And he doesn't stop walking. Past the crew, past Weintraub, past the executives from ABC waiting to congratulate him. He walks straight to his dressing room, closes the door, and doesn't come out for 45 minutes. When he finally emerges, his eyes are red. Whether from tears or exhaustion, no one knows. Frank, Weintraub says carefully, that was incredible. You killed them. Frank looks at him for a long moment. Yeah, he says flatly, I killed them. He walks past without another word. The main event was a commercial triumph. The album sold well. The reviews were largely positive. Frank Sinatra had proven he could still fill an arena, still command a crowd, still be the chairman of the board. But the ratings told a different story. The broadcast finished 40th for the week. America chose to watch Kojak and reruns of Father Knows Best over the greatest entertainer of the 20th century. Frank heard about the ratings the next morning. He laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. You know what that means, Jerry? It means they don't need me. They never needed me. They just needed something to clap for. And now they've got Telly Savalas. Over the next few years, Frank continued to perform. He toured. He played Vegas. He made more albums. But something had shifted after Madison Square Garden. The hunger was gone. The fire was dimmer. Friends noticed he talked about retirement constantly. Not as a threat, but as a destination. A place he was working his way back to. The applause doesn't fill you up, he told Dean Martin once, over drinks. It just makes you hungrier. And then you need more. And more. Until you realize you're not a man anymore. You're just a machine that turns applause into nothing. Dean, who understood emptiness better than most, just nodded. So what do you do? Dean asked. I don't know, Frank said. Maybe you learn to stop being hungry. The story of Frank Sinatra's comeback in 1974 is usually told as a triumph. The chairman of the board returns. Old Blue Eyes is back. The king reclaims his throne. But that's not the real story. The real story is about a man who discovered that getting everything you want doesn't mean you want it anymore. Frank Sinatra had spent 50 years chasing applause, chasing love, chasing proof that the skinny kid from Hoboken was worth something. And when he finally got all the applause the world had to offer, he found himself standing in the middle of Madison Square Garden, surrounded by 20,000 adoring fans, feeling more alone than he'd ever felt in his life. That's the cruelest trick success can play. It promises to fill you up. It promises that if you just achieve enough, accomplish enough, hear enough cheering, you'll finally feel whole. But the applause fades, the crowd goes home, and you're left with yourself. Frank Sinatra understood this better than anyone. He called himself an 18-karat manic depressive. He knew that the highs of performance were always followed by lows that no standing ovation could fix. He spent his whole life on a seesaw, swinging between ecstasy and despair, never finding balance. The night at Madison Square Garden wasn't really a comeback. It was a confrontation. Frank versus the emptiness. Frank versus the man he used to be. Frank versus the lie that one more show, one more ovation, one more triumph would finally make him feel okay. He won the crowd that night, but he lost something too. Some last piece of the illusion that performing could save him. The biggest performance of Frank Sinatra's life wasn't the show he gave. It was the mask he wore while giving it, the smile that hid the emptiness, the confidence that covered the doubt, the voice that sang while the heart stayed silent. Sometimes the biggest performance is knowing when to stop performing. Frank learned that lesson in 1971 when he retired. He forgot it in 1973 when he came back. And he remembered it again, standing alone in his dressing room at Madison Square Garden, with the cheers still echoing and the silence already growing. Maybe that's the real legacy of Frank Sinatra. Not the songs or the films or the awards. The reminder that fame is not fulfillment, that applause is not love, that sometimes the bravest thing a performer can do is walk away from the stage and face the silence. This is the story the spotlights never showed, the moment behind the comeback, the truth behind the triumph. Frank Sinatra would perform for another 20 years. He would fill arenas, break records, and cement his place as the greatest entertainer of the 20th century. But those who knew him say he was never quite the same after Madison Square Garden. The fire burned lower, the hunger dimmed. He didn't walk out that night, not physically, but something walked out of him. This was Frank Sinatra, Legacy Confidential. If this story changed how you see the chairman of the board, hit that like button, share it with someone who thinks success is the answer to everything, and subscribe, because we're just getting started. There are stories about the friendships, the feuds, the women, and the final years that no one wants to talk about. Leave a comment below. What do you think real success looks like? Is it the applause of 20,000 strangers, or the silence of knowing who you really are? Until next time, remember, the show must go on, but sometimes the man doesn't have to.